Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to what we're calling Thriving and Resilient, which is a series of webinars on how to raise MKs. We're really excited that you could join us today. I have a really special guest who was willing to come and share with us. Miss Carolyn Eumurian, to me, is Aunt Carolyn. When I was growing up in Ecuador as an MK, she was with our mission. And so from a very early age, I have wonderful memories of Aunt Carolyn. She's taught for many years at the Alliance Academy in Quito, Ecuador, and came back relatively recently. I'm sure she can tell you more about how long. And now serves as the education consultant for Avant Ministries. Aunt Carolyn has agreed to come on and share with everyone some things to think about as our students get older and prepare for college. So I'm going to just let her say a few words before we dive in. One thing before we do in terms of logistics is we added the live chat feature to the broadcast here. It's going to be to the right on the YouTube page. And that will be so that if anyone has any questions, we can just go ahead and use the live chat feature instead of doing the email thing we tried last month. So hopefully that'll be a little bit more simple. And we'll kind of look at some questions halfway through the presentation. And then at the end, Aunt Carolyn will be able to hopefully answer any questions that you have regarding the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Aunt Carolyn. Aunt Carolyn is joining us from Kansas City. Is that correct? Missouri?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So maybe you could kind of fill in some of the gaps briefly for me, and we can get started on what you've prepared for us today.
Okay. And you'll put up the PowerPoint, right?
I will. Would you like me to do so now or in just a minute?
That's fine. Welcome, everyone. It's good to be with you today. And we'll be focusing on the secondary years of school and just covering some ideas about how to think about and plan for post-high school education and life. I've been back in the United States for 8 or 9 years. And here at Kansas City, Missouri at Avant Ministries headquarters. It used to be Gospel Missionary Union. So yes, had 21 years in Ecuador and grateful for it all. And this is a role that I'm thankful this role exists for people raising children overseas. So looking forward to actually quite a bit of information coming your way. And please know that I'm glad to have more conversation with you afterwards in whatever form works for you to cover your individual questions. Some of you will be familiar with certain parts of this or all of this, and for others there will be a lot that will be quite new. So why don't we go ahead and get started. And if you are Canadian, why don't you just drop a note to Jonathan on the right-hand side of the window and let him know. I have a bit of Canada-specific information that I will use or not use, depending on whether or not there's anybody out there who anticipates a child going back to Canada for secondary education. Okay, so here we go. First slide. As I meet with parents, I encourage them to look long range. And so we need to look at the bigger picture of where your children are heading in the world. And you aren't raising them just to function effectively in your world, but to function in the larger world. And college is often just the start of that. So we can go to the next slide. I've got a big picture question for you. At age 18, think about what do you want your children to be socially, emotionally, spiritually, academically, and physically in order for them to be ready for what God has next in their lives. So you are raising them to be a part of what God's doing in the world. You're raising them to relate to people outside your family who are different from your family. So you want to teach them to do really practical things like laundry, managing their money, meeting deadlines, following through on commitments, picking up after themselves. There's just a lot in each of these areas. And so set goals, move towards them, and see what God has for them. Bring in the input from other people, from uncles and aunts, from close family members and friends too. And it's exciting to think what God has for your children. I'm going to give you a disclaimer here in the next slide. Actually, I have two disclaimers. And I even have a disclaimer about the disclaimer. A lot of this information was originally in letter form, email form to families in my mission. So that's why disclaimer 1 says these letters will be geared towards students moving from high school to further schooling in North America. And there are other options out there. Your child might not, no, that's fine. You can put up the second one as well. We'll see if we have any Canadians, because I really don't know as much about the Canadian process at all. So that was my other disclaimer. But as far as disclaimer number 1, not everybody's ready to move into college or right after high school graduation. So while we will be focusing on the process that heads towards university, keep in mind that there might be something better for your child when they graduate. They might need a gap year of studying at a torchbearer Bible school, gaining work experience. They might be headed towards a non-school option, which is terrific. And we need room for all of that. But our focus today will be on further schooling. Okay, so keep that in mind as we keep going. Next, before I get into the finance, I want to say one other thing. The most important point ever is that God is your maker, God is your child's maker, and he has the best plan for their lives. So his wisdom is what's needed, and what we're going to talk about today is just a small part. It's a small body of information. It can seem kind of overwhelming, but remember, it's just a little piece in the big picture of what God might have for your child, one piece of their formation, and it's not even the most important piece, okay? So while I'm a school person and we're talking about academics and grades and forms and stuff like that, remember that your child is a whole. Your child is a physical, emotional, spiritual, mental being. And so this is a little piece of that big picture. Because of that big picture question, we do need to briefly talk about finances because the cost of university has skyrocketed since we all attended. So according to the College Board, the average cost of tuition and fees for the 16-17 school year was $33,480 at private colleges, $9,650 for state residents at public colleges, and $24,900 for out-of-state residents attending public university. That's a lot of money, and actually I just checked and found out that college grads from this last school year are entering the working world with an average indebtedness of just over $37,000. So there are some that graduated colleges last year with more indebtedness and some with less, but the average was $37,000. So we'll keep that in mind, is that college is expensive and there isn't a convenient time to start saving for it, but get started. No matter the amount you're able to put aside monthly, you may feel like you're really behind the 8 ball on it, but go ahead. And our next point has to do with just starting a savings plan. If you're Canadian, it's called an RESP, and there's a link there. If you're a US citizen, it's called a Section 529 plan. There's a website there, and just to mention it, if you want these websites, don't bother writing them down. You could just email Jonathan and ask him for a copy of the PowerPoint, and I'm fine with you just taking that, and then you have the information there. The Section 529 plan of it's named after a section of the Internal Revenue Code. And it specifies that the requirements for these plans be free from federal income tax, which is why it's a good way to save. Okay, there are several kinds of plans. You'll need to check with your individual state to learn more about them. Okay, and a third point is to make sure that your child has a Social Security number, because it will be needed for the college application process. When I was growing up, I think not every child had one, and then somewhere in my growing up, I remember it became mandated. So you probably have one, but I thought I'd mention it anyway. Next, we're going to move into a series of steps you can take to help you and your child move towards post-secondary education and life. I'm putting them in a loose grade order. When you address each step will depend on your child's maturity, their readiness, your family's rhythms, and more. So some may apply to you and your child, and some may not. So just look at what's helpful, take away what's helpful. Don't worry about what doesn't apply, and don't worry about what you haven't done. Just consider it, see if it's useful, and move ahead. So we'll start with middle school. It's a great time to start talking with your child, if you haven't already, about their gifts, strengths, talents, what gives them joy, how what gives them joy might serve needs in the world, how God has wired them to function best. Share with them what you've learned through the various jobs you've had. Help your child articulate their strengths and their gifts and their talents. It's not a pride issue. You don't want to, it's not a matter of just pat, pat, pat on the back, aren't you a great kid? It is helping them look at who they are and stewarding effectively what God has given them. And that's the way you want to talk about it. It's stewardship. We talk about it in terms of money, but it's a life issue. I have been given this to steward, and it has weaknesses and it has strengths. How can God use those? And then begin searching out areas of study and careers that might interest them. Find a list of careers and courses of study online, because they've changed a lot since you were in college. There are a lot of things out there that we didn't know existed because of the changes in our world. Talk about the pros and cons of different lines of work. Talk about how what you do is a way for God to use you to bring salvation to the world. Help them to see that. What they decide to do is not because of a paycheck so that they can get skiing lessons, okay? A livelihood is so that they can steward what God has given them and made them to be, and He can use that in the bigger picture of the kingdom and bringing others into the kingdom. And then, if there's a chance along the way, even in middle school, have your child job shadow. If they show an interest in a career at this point, and there's an opportunity for them to learn more about that line of work in a real setting, great. I have a coworker here. His son was in middle school classroom here in Kansas City, and the mascot from the Kansas City Royals went and talked to his class about what it is to be a mascot. And from middle school on, my coworker's son knew that he wanted to be a mascot. And today he is the mascot for the Houston Texans, which is a football team. So early on, if you get a chance, do that. If it's not possible while you're on your field of service, plan for it during a furlough or an HMA. Moving on to grade 9, I'll say it once and I might say it twice. Help your student understand that grades are important. And you can tell that to a 9th grader and they may not really understand it, but say it anyway. Colleges will be looking at their transcript of grades from 9th to 12th grades. They especially like any accelerated courses you might take, AP courses, honors courses, dual credit courses, and grades really do matter. I just checked the Biola website where I attended, And I found that if I applied today, I would receive a $16,000 academic scholarship for my first year based solely on my high school GPA, which was good, and my SAT score, which wasn't spectacular. I mean, it was probably a high intermediate kind of score, but it wasn't excellent. $16,000 is a lot of money. So keep that in mind as you try to help your child understand that grades starting in grade 9 do count and colleges do look at them. Next, you'll want to keep a record of extracurricular activities, especially if you're a homeschooling parent. If your child's in a school, there are clubs and different ministry involvements if they're at a Christian school. But if you're homeschooling, keep track of field trips, ministry opportunities, sports and artistic and educational clubs, anything outside school academics that's developing your child's mind and person. So when your school class visits a World War I battlefield in France or Mayan ruins in Mexico, include it, write it up, make it sound good. You haven't just read about history, you've actually been there. And that's attractive to schools. This record of activities will make an excellent addition to your transcript. Moving on to grades 9 and 10. Again, this is a loose time frame for when things can happen. Discuss the reasons why or why not you go to college. Look at motives. You're going to have to look at your own motives too. Has everyone in your family always gone to college, and so you're just expecting that your child will do that too? When maybe your child is a hands-on learner and would be like the best plumber ever. So look at your motives, look at your child's, try to get your child to articulate their reasons for going or not going and help them understand. Do a little critical thinking with them if they're able. And you know what? 9th and 10th grade might be too soon. So don't worry if they're not able to have a discussion. But my reason was because I knew I thought I wanted to, well, actually, I thought I was going into journalism. And so I needed a degree, and that's a valid reason to go to college. I actually ended up being an elementary ed major. So also another thing would be to take an online career assessment so that sometimes they're just checklists and it will look at your students' interests and their skills and then give them related future career options that go with their interests, their skills, and the way they seem to work best. It will suggest jobs and career paths that you might never have heard of. For example, my friend's daughter is majoring in cybersecurity at Purdue. I didn't even know it was a major, but of course it is in our world today. Myers-Briggs type indicator test, it's the MBTI. This is the kind of test that would give you this kind of information, and there are a lot of other tests out there. So consider that. The next point has to do specifically with kids coming from a homeschooling background. I've watched students move from homeschooling to university, and sometimes their homeschooling curriculum doesn't have them doing some things that they need to be able to do at the college level. So things like filling in the bubbles on a test form, taking notes from a lecture, doing a group project where they've got to work with each other. It's give and take, it's compromise. Online research, writing a paper, doing a PowerPoint, meeting time deadlines, following written instructions. So I find that homeschool students are used to having more say in their own education. They own their education more, and they've got to make an adjustment to an environment that might not have much room for negotiation. So college can be kind of a rude shock if a student doesn't know how to organize their learning, make it to class on time, and turn in work when it's due. So consider those things. Just a quick note, go ahead with grade 10. Just a quick note, and then we'll take a little break if there's a question. If your student might be interested in the military academy, you need to start checking into it early on, because they have to have like a senator's recommendation, and there are extra hoops to go through. It is a longer, more complex process. The other way to head into the military is by going through ROTC while they're in college, and then from that training program, they can move into the military without attending a military academy. Okay, before we move on, let me stop for a moment and see if you have any questions. And if you do, I think you just type them in on the right-hand side of your screen.
Yep, just go ahead and use the live chat feature if you have any questions, and I will go ahead and read them here. There's a little bit of a delay, so we might have to wait a couple seconds. I think there's like a 30-second delay between what we say and what comes out on YouTube.
Sure.
I guess live is relative in that sense. It's pretty good. It works pretty well. One thing that so if you're listening, you have any questions, feel free to type them in, and we'd be happy to see if we can't, or not me, I can't speak to them, but perhaps Aunt Carolyn can speak to them. One thing that was interesting that you mentioned was that the bubbles on the tests were something. Man, when I first took the PSAT, I walked in, I was homeschooled, K through 12. I walked into the Alliance Academy and to take the PSAT, and I was the only one. I remember I was the only one because of being homeschooled, not from the school, and that was kind of awkward in itself. And then those bubbles. I'm not entirely sure. I don't remember what my PSAT score was, but I think that the bubbles had something to say in addition to the answers that I tried, and then the answers that I gave on the test. But that was.
I didn't know that. I didn't know you had that story to reinforce my point. Good.
Something interesting there, a little tidbit.
Oh, I can just imagine you sitting in the gym there, feeling a little lost.
Yes, I took the SAT twice there, okay. And one time a bird flew into the gym, and they had to figure out, are we going to get the bird out of the gym in case it decides to poop all over people's answer sheet? So they're running around during the SAT test trying to get this bird out. It was an interesting day. Well, we're not getting any questions here right now, so we can just move ahead.
Let's
turn it back to you.
Okay, grade 10, 11. Again, flexing here. Actually, we're going to hit that standardized testing information. First, just consider what you're looking for in a university. This is an important point. Big school, small school, student-professor ratio, average amount of indebtedness a student graduates with. It's fine to put up those points, John. So there are a lot of things like that until you get right into this process, you realize that you have in your mind the school you went to, but schools are so hugely different from each other. So I just typed in college selection worksheet in Google, and I pulled up any number of different options. So find one, adapt it to suit your needs, but it will at least give you different things you need to look at as you prioritize what you're looking for, okay? And then decide where your child might be interested in applying. Hopefully they've maybe visited your alma mater, they maybe have friends at a school in the US, a school or two where they might be interested. They might have an area of the country they're interested in, but choose schools in two categories. First, choose ones that you as parents with your student believe that you can afford. And then also schools that your student is interested in, even though the price tag might be too high. I was interested in Biola University, but there was no way that was going to happen with what my parents had financially and what I could contribute. So I applied at both Biola University and a Cal State University. with a much lower price tag. And then the Lord just made it clear, because he gave me a wonderful state government grant, and I was able to go to Biola. But if I had stuck with just what my parents could afford, I would never have applied to Biola. So keep that in mind. Choose a couple schools, and then just narrow it down to a couple schools. Then you're going to want to think about standardized testing. Like Jonathan mentioned, part of the entrance process is that you're going to take at least one standardized test. There are two. There's the SAT and the ACT. The SAT is the Scholastic Aptitude Test, and it measures reading, writing, and math. There's an optional essay that takes 50 minutes. It's timed, and it's handwritten in pencil. Yes, you need to be able to fill out bubbles with a pencil. The American College Test, the ACT, also tests reading, writing, and math. It includes an optional essay, but it also has a section on science reasoning. And for that reason, I did not take it, because I knew I would not do well on the reasoning portion. I just took the Scholastic Aptitude Test, and that's what Biola required. That's what Cal State Fullerton asked for. I only took it once, but we're going to talk about that, and there are options there. Also, these days, test scores are important, and there are ways for your student to prepare for the test, and it's very worthwhile. If you go to either one of these, either the SAT or the ACT website, you'll find links so that your student can practice using real test questions. There are ways for them to receive one test question per day from the owners of the test, so they get a sampling of the kinds of questions that will be asked. There are also a lot of study guides available, and you can also take an online test prep course. I think they run $40, maybe $50. These tests are as much about knowing how to take the test as they are about the test material. So preparing ahead is well worth your time. And as Jonathan mentioned, your child will need to be able to fill out a bubble answer sheet in pencil while reading a test question in a booklet, okay? And these websites are also good sources of general info on college planning, finding a school, securing financial aid, in addition to information about the exams, okay? Now for homeschoolers, number 4 is institution-specific admissions testing. And what I mean by that is universities have keyed into the fact that more and more kids are being homeschooled, and they often have a tailor-made admissions process for homeschooled students. So check the website. They sometimes will administer their own tests for homeschoolers, because Jonathan was able to take the PSAT, which was a preparatory test, but some homeschool students and students located internationally sometimes don't have that chance. So be sure and check with each school where your student's applying to see what testing they require, and then plan accordingly. Okay, next, C is to set some HMA goals. Depending on when you take your HMA, visit a college campus or visit several. Maybe a community college, maybe a large state university, maybe your alma mater, so that your student has a mental picture when it comes to making decisions later on. Stay overnight in a residence hall if you can, and try to attend a class in your child's intended area of study. It just gives them a picture of what this will be. And I know a lot of families aren't able to do this. If you can, do it. Also, check state and provincial residency requirements, because all states are different. In the US, in-state rates for secular schools are greatly reduced. Even at some Christian liberal arts schools, there might be scholarships available if your student is a resident. And every state is different. When I lived in Ecuador, I had a California driver's license and a California bank account, but because I had been out of the state for so many days every year, I didn't have California residency. other states would have allowed me to be considered a resident because I had a driver's license and a bank account. So my next point is, remember, a driver's license and a bank account does not a resident make. Okay, let's go on to grade 11. By grade 11, your student is getting information from the schools that they've indicated an interest in. Might be a good point to narrow it down to 2 to 4 schools. You don't want to have to apply to 6 or 8 schools. It costs you $50 to $100 every time you apply to a college. There are some that, I just thought of this, where you can submit an application for free if it's in by October, November, because some schools have an early entrance process. But all that to say, narrow it down to several schools. And then point B, take the SAT or the ACT maybe at the end of grade 11, if you can, or better yet, take it during a summer HMA. It costs a lot less to take it in the US. There are more dates available, there are more locations to choose from, and you might not have to pay for the travel and hotel stay that you do if your student's taking it outside of the US, which is possible. There are international test sites. Jonathan took it at the Alliance Academy in Quito. We offered both of those tests regularly, multiple times every year. So for some of you, you can take it overseas. Some of you, you'll need to schedule it into a summer HMA. Let's move on to grade 12. Lots happens in grade 12, and we'll just hit a few of the high points. You can retake or take the SAT and or the ACT if you're going to early in the school year. You'll want to do it by September, latest October. Only retake it if your scores were lower than expected and you've done something to sharpen your test taking skills in the meantime. But if you haven't done anything different since you took it the first time, don't just assume that taking again is going to give you a better score. Do something in between to improve your score. And then apply for your top schools. Pay really close attention to deadlines. They're very important. And as the deadline approaches, make sure you've got the right paperwork. And as I mentioned, many schools have an early decision or an early action program. And you can be applying in November. You can be applying in October and get an acceptance by November of your senior year with some schools. Others, it's into the second semester before you would be hearing an answer. Keep track of deadlines. It's really important. And then make copies of everything you send in. Sometimes emails don't arrive where they're supposed to arrive. If you send things surface mail, we know the mail system never fails, but be prepared just in case it does. So save copies of everything and then do some double checking to make sure that things arrive where they're supposed to arrive. Then comes a big one, and it's the FAFSA form. It's an important date to remember, hence the emphasis. Traditionally, for as many years as I can remember, it was to be submitted by January 1st of your child's senior year. But this last year, they moved it back to September 1st of your child's senior year, and then you want to get it in before March 1st. Now, think of federal money as being, and Jonathan, you can go ahead and put up the subpoints because I might not touch on them too deeply at this point. But think of federal monies as a big pot with a limited amount of money to give away. So the later you come, the emptier the pot is. I was told that that's the case. So check into the FAFSA process early so that you know what paperwork you as a parent need to have on hand in order to fill it out. It's a very extensive process. And it really deserves a webinar all its own, but I'm not smart enough to give it. And I'm single, I have no children. I've actually never been through this whole process. And so it would be really great if you could key into a friend or coworker who has been through this process with you and can kind of share the nitty-gritty. The whole thing is online. So you open an account, you get one more password in your life, which is really exciting. And I'm not trying to scare you, but a really sharp lady in our mission said that it is a really complicated process. So for those of you that aren't familiar with it, you've never done it, it must be filled out for national, state, and or institutional aid. You will get no aid from any either the state, the country, the school itself, if you don't fill it out. So you're going to have to fill it out. And best to fill it out at a low finance time of the month, which I don't know exactly what that means. That probably applies more to a US-based family. So there are a couple of other points there. There's lots more to learn about it. But again, the website will tell you what you need to know, and make good friends with somebody who's been through it. That will be great. And then I just have a quote from the gal in our, oh, I forgot about that. Yes, there is a worksheet you can fill out, and it will tell you, you'll put in data, the most recent data that you have, and it will just give you an idea of how much money you might get from a federal Pell Grant, if any, from a federal work study, and then even loans, how much you might be offered in loans. And then it will also tell you the expected family contribution. So those are just the A, B, C, and D that go along with the FAFSA form. And if you've done it before, these subpoints will make sense to you. And if not, don't worry. You'll get on the learning curve and you'll be fine. Let's go from there to grade 12. These are quotes actually from a gal on our mission. She has been through it several times, and she keeps notes each year that she's filled it out because she has 2 sons, and she's going to have a total of about 5 or 6 years of filling out the FAFSA. And so it's a long process. Start early, allow time for it. Okay. All right, let's go on to grade 12. We're on the home stretch. By the second semester of grade 12, you're really you're doing anything that you haven't already done. Okay, so if you haven't gotten the FAFSA in, you are doing that pronto, right away. Happy New Year. Okay, then you are waiting to hear from schools. Now, along with your letter of acceptance from a school will come information about the financial aid package that they're offering you. That's going to include grants. It's going to, so federal grants. It's going to include any kinds of loans that are needed to complete the tuition amount, and it might include work-study options. So they might offer your child 10 hours a week of an on-campus job. The money from which job would go towards their college costs. It will also include, that acceptance letter will also include the expected family contribution, and they're going to assume that you as parents are taking on indebtedness. No, you don't have to, but that's all going to be in that letter. The other thing that you want to do as you wait to hear from schools is apply for outside scholarships. Begin by checking for any MK or Christian ministry dependent scholarship the school might offer if your child's applying for a Christian liberal arts school. Also, many Christian liberal arts schools have church matching scholarships. For instance, I think Viola's is $1,300 this year. So my sending church volunteers $1,300 for my child to go to Viola, and Viola will match that. That's $2,600 every year. That's helpful. So look for those kinds of things. Also local, in the area of the school, sometimes the best bets are some local scholarships. I don't know a lot about it. There are a million college websites. You shouldn't have to pay for much to get on a scholarship search website. But again, check with people before you just randomly sign up and pay money for a scholarship search website, okay? I just went through a lot of information. Some of you are a little overwhelmed. And let me put a little bit of perspective on it before we go to the last slide. High grades in high school have been shown to not be an all that accurate predictor of success in life. In other words, those kids who got straight A's in high school they're not necessarily the most successful people in life. There are other things that are so important. Your child's heart being the Lord's is the most important thing ever. Their character, their integrity, their people skills are going to lead to much more success in life, and more importantly, in God's kingdom, than the stuff that we've been talking about here. We all need to live within this system, and we want to do it as effectively as we can, but please keep in mind that your child is more than their SAT score and their grades and their scholarship package. So to close, let me just mention a couple of areas to pay attention to, which are really important as an expat family sends a child to college. One, church. Your child has maybe never chosen a church in their life. And they're going to be sent off to school, and they're going to have options of where to go to church, and it may be overwhelming, and they may opt to not go to church at all. There's a big fallout from faith among college-age kids. It's like 70% in the US. So help your child understand the importance of a church community and help them know how to choose a church. What do you look for? Second, family. Our college-age kids really, 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 really need a home base when they leave you. So they need a place where there are people, even if it's a few, that understand their multicultural world and love them for who they are and seek to enter into their world. It might be with relatives. It might be a great supporting church that gets you and has had a long-standing relationship with your kids. So cultivate a home base somewhere in the US. I know sometimes your summer furlough is getting in the car and driving for 2 months. Please land someplace for longer than 2 days every 2 years, okay? And then I probably won't go into Raft, but Jonathan can tell you more about it. I can tell you more about it. Make sure that your children end well. Make sure that they say goodbye well, that they have closure, that they're able to look ahead to what's next without having baggage from what they're leaving behind. And then enroll them in a re-entry program. And again, there are options. Jonathan can tell you about some. Anybody in MK education or care in your organization can tell you options. But this gives them a group of people with similar experience that they can bond with immediately. It's great for them to do it that summer before they start college. Okay, that's more than enough to throw at you in one day. And if you ever want to contact me directly, I told Jonathan that I'm glad for you to have my email address, and I will turn it back to him. Oh, there I am.
Thank you so much, Aunt Carolyn, for sharing today. If we have anyone with any questions, please feel free to use the live chat feature there on the right-hand side of the YouTube video. So we'll hold on for a little bit in case you think of something that's been on your mind, and then I can read those out to Aunt Carolyn here. One thing that I know that here in Costa Rica, the SAT at least is administered at MBS, which is Marion Baker School, and I know people have taken that there. I'm not sure about the ACT. I do know I know they also have the PSAT, because I know some of our youth group students who go to Marion Baker have taken the PSAT there. So that would be, I know there's more than one location in Costa Rica, but I do know for certain that it is offered at MBS, Marion Baker School. The raft that Aunt Carolyn mentioned is an acronym for saying good goodbyes. We're going to cover that a little more in depth, probably either in April or in May, as a lot of people transition out in the summer for wherever they're going, whether they're leaving a language school, or perhaps that's the time when they're going to be moving back to the States. The school years and that being a natural transition time often is when that will happen. So still waiting to see if there are any questions that will come in that we can answer here before we go. Let's see. Have you, Aunt Carolyn, have you had what have been some things that you've seen that have helped students succeed, specifically those who were in school abroad and move back to the United States, and their families continue abroad? What are some things maybe that you've observed that have been helpful to successful college transitions? I mean, I know we touched on some, but if there was anything else in addition to that you'd be able to share.
I think I've seen families do it different ways. Sometimes they'll take an HMA for half a year and be there through the student's first semester. That can be really helpful because right about October, November can be a real rough point in a student's freshman year, first year away from home. And some families will do a summer furlough, and then one parent will stay on through the first several weeks, month of school. It's important to have somebody there, whether it's a family member, a close friend, who can help them navigate those initial weeks of school. What if I need to change a class? Just how to function. So somebody to walk with them. And if you can't be there to do it, then some kind of surrogate parent is a wonderful thing. Or if there's a family nearby that has a child that's also at that school, but I think that somebody to help that with that transition and not being left on their own. If you have to stay on the field and no one can go with them, make sure that wherever they're landing is a really friendly bit of home for them and somebody who's close to them. Part of it is just wisdom these days because as kids start school, they're faced with just getting set up financially, debit card, computer, internet, all that kind of stuff. So it's a little more complex than when I went off to college. Plus, my parents were available. That's helpful. And in our mission, something I appreciate is that we all actually pay into an MK fund, $6 a month. I'm single, I have no children, but I pay $6 a month into what's called I think it's called MK Care Fund or MK Fund. That money is used so that every college student gets one trip paid back to their parents' country of service during their 4 years of college. And especially that first Christmas is a critical time. So, and holidays, if you're away, some schools, kids have to move off campus during Thanksgiving and they have to move off campus during Christmas. Anticipate those kinds of vacations and help see that your children are taken care of so that they're not left adrift. Because Jonathan, you probably have that.
We had to leave for Thanksgiving, and that was probably the most awesome because it was such a short trip. It wasn't worth spending a lot of money to go somewhere far away.
Yeah. And you know, the other part of it is that, again, children belong to the Lord, and there's a certain amount that you can help plan. And there's a certain amount where we all say, Lord, here's this need. I'm here. My child's at school. They need to be out for Thanksgiving. We don't have the money to get them somewhere. Maybe I can write somebody and say, is there any chance, that our child can spend it with you? And your children also will make their faith their own. You keep close contact so that they're not floundering. But they need to learn that God is their God as well. And he will show that through the care he takes for them as well. So we don't micromanage all this, but those are just some important times that can be hard for kids as they adjust.
Yes. And he is good through it all.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Aunt Carolyn. I just want to end with a quick word of prayer for anyone, any parents who are going through just trying to figure out the ins and outs. And but I want to thank you so much for your time and the preparation that you put into coming and sharing with all of us today. And I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Father, we just thank you so much for the work that you do in the lives and hearts of young people. And Lord, we lift all of them up to your care, and we trust you with their futures. Lord, help us to make wise decisions, and to parent well, guide our thoughts, our decisions, but also guide the steps of our young people, of our young students, of the young people in our lives, Lord. And we thank you for all of this. Thank you for our time together. Amen. All right. Well, thank you so much, Aunt Carolyn, again. And thank you, everyone who was able to spend some time listening with us. If you have any questions, you can kind of rewind back to the email address that Aunt Carolyn had set up there, or you can get in touch with me through the through my Facebook page, John Hunter. If you most everyone listening probably has that. Otherwise, you can also contact Thriving and Resilient, which is the name of the this Gmail channel, that YouTube channel we set up for this streaming, Thriving and Resilient at gmail.com. And hopefully everyone will have a great month, and we will come back together in April on the 7th. It will be the first Friday of April instead of the second Friday of April, due to Good Friday being on the 14th. So I hope everybody has a great day. Lord bless. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.